everybody, and welcome to Byju's 6th, 7th and 8th grade channel. I'm your biology teacher Aishwarya, and in this particular video, we are going to be doing the chapter summary for the chapter Reproduction in Animals, and we will wind this up in just under 30 minutes. Now, if you are a regular subscriber of this channel, then you know how to get started. Quickly hit the like button on this video and share this video with all of your friends. But if you are very new to this channel and this is probably the first video that you stumbled upon, first and foremost, welcome to our small, beautiful little family. Now, we here at Byju's believe that conceptual clarity is the most important thing that will help you ace your exams, and that is going to be something that's going to remain with you for the rest of your life. So it's important that we focus on conceptual clarity, which is why all the classes that we take on our channel that is aligned to your curriculum is focused on the best visuals and of course focusing on the easiest and simplest explanation. So if you want an in-depth explanation for this particular chapter, you can go ahead and check out the one short video for this particular chapter that is available on our playlists and on our channel. But of course, here today, we are only going to be doing a chapter summary. And this is going to be as a part of our ongoing series in the channel, that is Crash Course. So what is this Crash Course? So basically what we do in this particular series is to make sure that we provide you with everything that is needed to ace your annual exams. And as you can see here, we see that we will be doing full syllabus revisions. We are going to be doing complete chapter analysis in 20 minutes. We will be doing math formula cheat sheets. We'll do mind maps, subjective, objective questions, exam hacks, mock tests, and a lot more. So if you believe that this is going to be the place where you will get everything that is required for your annual exam preparation, quickly hit the subscribe button. But if you still feel like, why should I listen to you, ma'am? Do I really subscribe to this channel? Then let me tell you, you watch 5 minutes into this video and I'm sure you will be convinced in order to stay subscribed to our channel. So without wasting any more time, let's get started with learning about reproduction in animals. Now, first and foremost, we should have an understanding of what do we mean by reproduction. Now, reproduction can be simply defined as the biological process by which living organisms will make young ones of their own kind. So this right here is the simplest definition that you can get for reproduction. Now, here when we talk about organisms making young ones of their own kind, we see it all around us, right? So we know that adult humans that are there will give rise or will give birth to young babies, right? Or if you were to look at other animals, in the case of dogs, we see that dogs gives rise to puppies, right? We know that cats that are there, they'll give rise to kittens. So in all cases, we see that there are young ones which are produced at all times. Now, why is it that living organisms are carrying out reproduction? Does it mean that if reproduction does not happen, living organisms cannot survive? Because we know that there are certain processes in our body which are very, very necessary. For example, if I were to talk about the process of digestion, or if I were to talk about the process of respiration by which we get energy, we see that if these processes do not take place, it will be very difficult for us, right? Which is why here these processes are necessary for survival. But is reproduction necessary for survival? That is something that we need to think about. Now, when we talk about reproduction, if say there is an organism X, right? And the organism X decides that this organism will not reproduce. And if it decides not to reproduce, it means that the organism will not, die or anything, right? The organism will continue to live. But what happens is that every organism that is there on earth has a certain lifespan or a period of birth to death. And if organisms stop reproducing, after their lifespan, we see that the population will start to decrease. So if you think about us human beings, I go 10,000 years back, I will find humans. Today also if I see, I will find humans. So were the same humans who were there 10,000 years ago, are they there even now? No, right? But we still find the species. That is because of the process of reproduction. So what is the significance of reproduction? That is a question they will ask you in your exam. So what is the significance? We see that this ensures the continuity of species, which is why reproduction is an extremely important process. Now, when you talk about how living organisms carry out reproduction, we see that there are two modes in which they can carry this out. So we see that there could be an asexual mode of reproduction and there could be a sexual mode of reproduction. Now, comparing and contrasting sexual and asexual mode of reproduction is very commonly asked in the exams for maybe 2 marks or 3 marks. So you can put a star mark next to this because this will come in your exams, right? The chances of this kind of question coming is very high. So put a star mark in your textbook. So let's understand more about sexual and asexual mode. Now we know that in the process of reproduction, there is a young one or an offspring which is produced, and the organism that gives rise to the offspring is what we call as the parent, right? So we have a parent or an adult organism that gives rise to a young one or a offspring. So these are some terminologies I may keep using. Now when we talk about asexual and sexual mode, first let's have a look at asexual mode. Now, when you talk about how many parents are involved in the process of asexual mode of reproduction, we see that there is only one parent which is involved, right? And often we observe asexual reproduction in lower organisms, right? And of course, mainly we observe it in lower organisms. Now, in this case, when we say only one parent is involved, it means that this particular one parent, its body will undergo certain changes and it will give rise to certain offsprings. So here we see that it is not producing anything else for reproduction, or another way of me phrasing that would be it is not producing any specialized cells for reproduction. Within the body, changes are they undergo certain changes within their body and then they give rise to certain offsprings, right? So we know that at times certain specialized cells which are involved in reproduction are what we call as reproductive cells, right? So we see that there are no reproductive cells here, or another name for it is germ cells, or another name for it is gametes, right? So in this case, we see that gametes are not involved. Now, because the parent is undergoing certain changes and giving rise to the young one, we see that the offspring or the young one which is produced is actually more or less identical to the parent. So we see that certain organisms, if I were to give you certain examples, we see that amoeba, right, bacteria, Spirogyra, hydra, these are all examples of organisms that carry out asexual reproduction. Now, on the other hand, if I were to compare it with sexual reproduction, in sexual reproduction, we see that there are two parents which are involved, right? So, in this case, we see that there is a male and there is a female, right? So, two parents are involved. Now, when I say two parents are involved, it means that these guys produce certain specialized cells called the reproductive cells, right? And these reproductive cells are what are getting involved, which means that gametes are involved, right? So we see that these gametes are involved in the process of reproduction and they have systems in place that help in the production of gametes and of course how they further go ahead and facilitate the process of reproduction. Now, because we see that there is one gamete from the male, which we call as male gamete, right? And we see that there is one from the female, which we call as female gamete, and they come together to give rise to the offspring. We see that it will not be identical. There are two parents, and it cannot be identical to two parents. We see that there are some similarities with the male or the father, and there are some similarities with the female or the mother. So in this case, we can always say that they will only be similar to the parents and never identical to their parents. So in this case, if I were to give you some examples, we see that most common example we can take are humans, right, of dogs, cats, so on, right? So this right here are four main points of difference between a sexual mode of reproduction and sexual mode of reproduction. Put a star mark in your book as well. So now let's explore a little bit more on asexual mode of reproduction. Now, as per the NCERT, there are different types of asexual mode of reproduction, but the two modes or the two types that you need to learn about are binary fission and budding. Now, binary fission, as the name suggests, so binary means two, fission means to split, right? So in binary fission, we see that the parent organism that is there will split into two, giving rise to two daughter cells, right? So that is what happens in binary fission, and we often see it in organisms like amoeba. Now, when we talk about amoeba, we know that it does not have a proper shape, and it has a cell membrane, it has nucleus and cytoplasm. And I told you that in asexual mode of reproduction, we see that within the body, there are certain changes that takes place that give rise to the offspring. So effectively what happens is that once the parent is ready to reproduce, or once the parent amoeba is ready to reproduce, we see that it will double itself. Now, what do I mean by it will double itself? That means how much ever cytoplasm is there, that will become 2x. Whatever genetic material is there, it will make a whole other copy of the genetic material. So that will it'll almost make a Xerox copy of the genetic material, the full thing. So now basically what is there in the parent? 2 times the cytoplasm and 2 copies of the genetic material. Now, based on this, first and foremost, we see that the nucleus will divide. That means the genetic material, one copy will go to one end, the other copy will go to the other end, right? The nucleus will divide and the cytoplasm will divide. And eventually, it will give rise to 2 daughter cells. So now you understand why it went 2x and 2x, so that when it splits, it's as good as the parent which had the amount of genetic material. This does not mean that genetic material becomes half. That is a misconception. But rather it makes a copy of it so that it can go into 2 ends and 2 identical daughter cells are produced. So that is what we understand as binary fission, where splitting of the parent cell into 2 equal parts takes place. While when we talk about budding, right? Budding is a process where there is formation of an outgrowth from the parent, or what we call as a bud, right? So this outgrowth is what we understand as a bud, where in one part of the parent, the cells will start to divide rapidly and it will form a bud. Now, this bud will undergo development, where in the case of organisms like Hydra, which is multicellular, we see that many cells will start to form, and we see that there's formation of tentacles as we observe in Hydra, and then of course we see that there is production. We see that there is maturation. So once it is fully mature, we see that the bud will detach and it will form a new organism. Now, although this new organism is identical to the parent, we observe that size-wise it still has to develop furthermore. But nonetheless, we see that here it's not that the parent will split, but within the parent body there is an outgrowth that eventually matures and forms a new organism. So this was all about binary fission and budding and the main points that are related to this. So I hope now this part is clear. Now let's move on to the next part, which is sexual reproduction. Now, I told you that in sexual reproduction, there are 2 parents which are involved, right? So, we see that there is a male and there is a female. And I told you that certain specialized cells are produced. So, we have male gamete which is produced and we have female gamete which is produced by the female. Now, this production of certain specialized cells takes place within the body. Now, if I were to take an example of humans, right? So, we see that in the human body, there is a dedicated organ system that is responsible for not only the production of gametes, but also for the whole process of reproduction, right? Or to facilitate the process of reproduction, I would say. Yes? So, we see that there is a reproductive system altogether, right? So, we observe that there is a reproductive system that plays a key role. And we see that the males have a male reproductive system, and in this case we see that the females have a female reproductive system. So let's understand more about the male and female reproductive systems. Now, when we talk about the male reproductive system, we see that the main reproductive organ is the testis in males, right? So this is the main reproductive organ. Now, why am I calling this the main reproductive organ? Because this testis is what is responsible for the production of the male gamete or the sperm. So, the male gamete is what we call as the sperm. And here we see that the testis produce millions of sperms, right? Not just 1 or 2, but millions of sperms are produced. And once they are produced, they undergo maturation. And from there, we see that through the sperm duct, right? Or what we also call as the vas deferens, the sperms are transported and eventually we see that they are taken all the way to the erectile organ, which is the penis, after which it is ejaculated out or sent out of the male body. Now, once it is sent out of the male body, where does it go? Now, to facilitate the process of reproduction, we see that the sperms are sent into the female body, right? Now, we see that the vagina is the part that of the female reproductive tract that receives the sperms, right? So, we see that this is the part that receives the sperms. And we see that once the sperms are received in the vagina, we see that they will move upwards. Now, of course, we see that here within the female body or as a part of the female reproductive system, the main reproductive organ here is the ovary, right? So, we see that the ovary here is the main reproductive organ which produces the female gamete, that is the egg or the ovum, or if I were to use plural, it would be ova. Now, every month, the ovary will release only one egg, right? And we see that this process of release of egg is what we call as ovulation. And it will release it into the fallopian tube or the oviduct. Now, if the sperms enter along the time when the egg is released, we see that the sperms will move up through the, vagina to the uterus, and then it will reach the oviduct. And we see that in the oviduct, we observe that there is fusion, right? Which means here that effectively the sperm, which is the male gamete, will fuse with the egg, okay? And this process of fusion is what we understand as fertilization. Now, it's important to understand why is this fusion taking place? What is the need for fusion? For this, you need to have a basic understanding of the structure of the male gamete and the female gamete. So when you talk about the sperm, right? So we see that the sperm here has a structure like this where there's a head, and the head here has the genetic material, right? And then of course it has a middle piece, and then of course it has a long tail that helps it swim upwards, right? So we see that the movement is possible because of the tail. Now, on the other hand, when we look at the egg, we see that there is nucleus that has the genetic material, and there is the cytoplasm as well. Now, in both cases, what do we observe? We observe that there is genetic material, right? And we see that the genetic material that is there is coming both from the father and it is coming from the mother. So, basically, when the two cells are fusing, this genetic material is combining, right? So, fusion of male gamete, I'll write this once again, fusion of male gamete and female gamete that is there results in the formation of a single-celled structure which we call as zygote, right? So, the zygote is a single-cell structure that has genetic information from the mother and father. Now, here what do we observe? We see that the zygote that is there is formed in the fallopian tube, or we see that it is formed in the oviduct. Now, the zygote will start to divide. It's a single cell and this will start to divide, or it will increase in number, right? So, it will become 2 cell, 4 cell, it will become many cells. And by the time we see that it becomes an embryo, which is a multicellular structure, we see that it will reach the uterus, right? Now, this particular embryo, if you look at the uterus, we know that it is a pear-shaped structure, right? And we know that it will be thickened with blood. So, once it reaches the uterus, the embryo will get embedded, right? So, we see that the embryo will get embedded in the walls of the uterus, right? And this process, so that it can develop further. And this process is what we understand as implantation, right? So, what is implantation? The process by which there is embedding of the embryo into the wall of the uterus for further development. And once it undergoes further, once it is embedded, right, we see that the embryo will start to develop here, and eventually we see that it results in the formation of a fetus, right? Now, a fetus will have basic structures like limbs, it will have ears, and it will have eyes, right? And eventually we see that once it completes the development in 9 months, we see that the mother will give birth to the young baby. So, with this, of course, what do we understand? We see that there is process of fertilization, which is the fusion of gametes, a male and female gamete resulting in the formation of zygote. But this whole fusion and process of development is taking place internally in the case of humans. which is why this type of fertilization that exists is called as internal fertilization, right? So what is internal fertilization? It is taking place within the female body. It was happening at the oviduct. But is that the case in all animals? As a matter of fact, no. In organisms like frogs and fishes, we observe that it takes place outside, where the gametes, where the sperm and the egg is actually laid out of the body, or it's released out of the body in a medium like water, and we see that large number of eggs are released, so that at the end of the day we see that the chances of fertilization can be increased, right? And the fusion takes place outside the female body. So normally seen in certain aquatic animals like fishes and frogs. Now, because of this, we also observe that there are two kinds of development also that takes place, right? So, on the basis of development, in the case of us humans and most mammals, I would say, we are viviparous. Now, what do I mean by viviparous? Now, you take the example of humans only. Once fusion has taken place internally, we see that even development of the fetus is taking place within the female body. And eventually, we see that we give birth to the young ones. So this is what we understand as viviparous organisms. But in some cases, like for example birds, reptiles, fishes, we see that they are oviparous, right? And we see that in this case, they would lay eggs. So the development would not take place within the female body per se, but it actually takes place inside eggs. And after that, the eggs will hatch and the young one comes out after full development. So this is one point of difference between oviparous and viviparous organisms. And when we talk about the development of organisms, right? So in our case, if you think about it, we see that as we grow, like from infant to an adult, we see that we undergo certain transformations. But there are no drastic transformations that take place. While on the other hand, some organisms like frogs, insects, butterflies, right? We see that they undergo certain drastic changes. And we see that these drastic transformations from larvae to adult is what we call as metamorphosis. So if you want to take a look at the life cycle of the frog, once the eggs are hatched, we see that they form a certain structure or larvae called as tadpole. Now the tadpole here, first of all, is aquatic. It's found underwater and it has gills that will help it survive, right? But over time, we see that they will develop small feet and eventually the larvae will undergo certain changes within its body and it will become an adult frog which has the ability to survive both on land and water, and it would have developed lungs, it would have developed limbs, right? So from a tadpole to the adult, we see that there is a drastic transformation which is what we call as a metamorphosis. So we observe it in silk moths, we observe it in butterflies. So these are all some other examples of metamorphosis that we observe. So with this, of course, if you see, we have wound up the whole chapter summary and these are the broad topics that we have covered. Now, just to make sure that you have understood all the concepts in the utmost clarity, we have an exam prep test, right? So as you can see in the description of this particular video, you will find a Google form wherein you will have 10 very simple questions. But on solving these 10 questions, you will get an understanding of how prepared you are for this particular chapter. And let me know how much you score out of 10 in the comments below. And if you found this class helpful, then let me know in the comments of this particular video as well. And like I told you, if you were a new subscriber, and I'm sure that now you know that Byju's 6 to 8 is the place which has got you covered. And of course, show us your love by liking this video, sharing this video with your friends, and staying subscribed to our channel. Up until next time, everybody, take care, lots of love, and see you soon.